Yo ho ho, welcome back to another video. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you're keeping well. So today I'm going to be filming quite a hefty fantasy book haul, and initially I was thinking I didn't have enough books to make a haul that was worth watching, like worthwhile watching. And then I actually took the thumbnail for this video and I was like, actually, this is excessive. So these are books that I have collected over the last couple of months. They're books that I either bought on sale or I bought used secondhand. I figured since now fantasy is one of my most owned genres, I might as well talk about it a little bit more and talk about the aspects that I do enjoy in fantasy. So without further ado, let's get into the book haul. So first up is The Year of the Witching by Alexis Henderson. This is a book that I got out from the library and I was really enjoying it, and then someone put a reserve on it and I wasn't able to finish it in time. So then I was like, I'm too invested not to find out what happens or to wait a significant amount of time to get it back from the library, so I just picked up my own copy. So this is about a young biracial girl called Emmanuelle, and she lives in this incredibly religious community called Bethel, and it's run by a religious leader referred to as the Prophet, and he has banned anyone leaving Bethel to go and venture out into the forest that surrounds it because there are supernatural things that happen within this forest, and there's a lot of kind of like rumor and fear about it. And one day, as Emmanuelle is coming back from the market, her animal gets free and runs into the forest, and naturally she just runs in afterwards without thinking about what she was actually doing. And whilst in the forest, she can't find her animal, but she does come across 4 witches who bestow a gift on her, including her mother's journal. So she doesn't really know much about her mother, and once she receives the journal, she realizes who her mother was and the potential power that she might hold within herself. So this is dubbed as a feminist fantasy, and I'd certainly have to agree with that. Alexis Henderson is writing a follow-up to this, so apparently it's meant to be a series now, and that's something I'm really looking forward to. Next up, I have Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. Now, I'm a huge fan of Neil Gaiman's work. I have been ever since I was a teenager, and I thought I would pick this up because I don't know a whole heap about Norse mythology or any of like the tales or folklore that goes along with it, aside from what I've actually played in God of War. So I thought I would pick this up and give it a read. It's multiple stories that apparently Neil Gaiman has made a little bit more linear so that they flow into one another a bit easier, and it's meant to be quite informative and a really good place for beginners to start, so I'm looking forward to getting into this summer. The next book that I have is Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a book that I recently picked up in a charity shop because I had tried to read it previously, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I got it out of the library and I just couldn't really get into it. And it's not the typical story that I find myself gravitating towards. I don't really like stuff that has any sort of like romantic elements to it. And I know the prose in this book is very kind of like flowery and romantic and stuff, but it also has the contrast of ancient Greece and that sort of background to it. So this is the story of Achilles told from the perspective of his best friend slash love interest, Patroclus. Patroclus is originally lined up to be a suitor for Helen of Troy, but he is ultimately exiled, and that leads him to meeting Achilles, and they start a sort of best friend slash deep meaningful relationship sort of thing. And that's pretty much all I know about it. So I'm going to give this my all, and hopefully I'll be able to get some sort of enjoyment out of it. The next book that I have to show you is Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. So I got incredibly burnt out on the Song of Ice and Fire series. I still have yet to read the second installment of A Dance of Dragons because I was trying to finish the books before the final HBO series came out. And when it did, naturally I watched it along with everyone else, and it left such a bad taste in my mouth that I just couldn't continue reading the series, even though I just had that one book to get through to be caught up with everyone else. But when they decided to focus on the Targaryen family and do the show about them, I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And pretty much immediately I was like sucked back in, and so I wanted to pick up the book because I just want a bit more clarification on the characters and the history of the Targaryen family. So as I just said, this follows the history of the Targaryen dynasty. So this starts out with going as far back to Aegon the Conqueror, who was the creator of the iconic Iron Throne, and it follows the following generations of Targaryens who fight to keep hold of it and their power up until the Civil War. There are some things that are obviously referenced within A Song of Ice and Fire that are technically spoilers for what happens in this, but I'm still really looking forward to getting into it. The next book that I have is Pyreneesi by Susanna Clarke. This really did interest me because it's set in an alternative universe, and we have our main character who is a man who wakes up in a seemingly unending labyrinth, and he has no memory of how he got there, and he has no memory of who he is. And all he has for company is the birds above him and the statues within the labyrinth. But there is something that is manipulating him within this labyrinth, and it's referred to as the other. The other is using the man to try and find what's referred to as the great and secret knowledge. So I've seen really great reviews of this book, and I love labyrinths. I think a lot of you know that already. I love that kind of claustrophobic, confused, alienated vibe, and I'm hoping there will be a significant amount of that in this. The next book I have is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. So I was never intending to start this series. It was never anything that was a super high priority to me as like a newly dubbed fantasy reader to get into. But I came across it in a charity shop a couple of weeks ago, and this copy looks like it was unread. Like, it looks pristine, and it was only €1, and I was like, I think this is the universe telling me that I should buy this and I should read it and see how I get along with it. So this is the first book in the King Killer Chronicles. It's a high action fantasy that apparently has some really beautiful prose, and it follows a young orphan, which is such a typical trope in fantasy. I don't know why we be loving on orphans so much. It's like, are your parents totally dead? Well, guess what? You're the motherfucking messiah. But not only is he just an orphan, he's described as a feral orphan. So I was like, yeah, okay, that's pretty hardcore. I can get behind that. He's somehow able to manage to pull himself up by his bootstraps, and he's granted entry to a incredibly competitive school for magic, and there he really hones in on his craft and supposedly becomes one of the most powerful magic users that they have ever seen. I know that's a really bare bones synopsis and incredibly vague and somewhat tropey, but that's all I know about the series, aside from the fact that it is meant to be super easy to read as well. Included in the reviews that I've read, it stated that, like, despite the size of the book, one shouldn't be intimidated going into it. Then I have Malice by John Gwynne. Now, I've seen John Gwynne surge in popularity over the last couple of years, and I was really interested to check out something by him. I know that he's got like multiple series out at the moment, and I wasn't really sure where to start. But I went onto Amazon and I was reading the synopsis of this. And then I went down and I read the author bio. It was such a charming and endearing bio that I was like, John Gwen's good people. And I'm just going to get this book based on his bio. So that's probably a really weird, kind of stalkery reason to pick up a book by an author. But I was just like, you know, he does LARPing with his sons and he just sounds like he's good crack. So I was like, he's probably a great writer. So in this world, ancient monsters are reawakening and the war to end all wars begins. It's a story that's packed full of greed and betrayal. It's written in the third person with multiple character viewpoints, which is how I like my fantasy. I don't like sticking with the same person throughout an entire 800-page novel. I do like a little bit of variation now and again. There's also not a whole heap of magic in the first book from what I hear. At least none of the characters are able to use magic, aside from in a place that's referred to as the Banished Lands, which I just think sounds totally badass. So this is definitely more of a high action fantasy based story, and I love that. I love reading about battles and wars and kind of like the politics that go along with that sort of thing. So I'm so excited to start this series, and it's one that I hope to start and finish within this year. The next book that I have is The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty series, and from what I've learned from the reviews that I've read, that this is definitely leaning more political than high fantasy, and that's something, like I've already said, is what really interests me in the fantasy genre. So this follows two friends who are complete polar opposites. They come from completely different backgrounds, one being the son of a duke and the other being a bandit. But they've put aside their differences and realised how well they get along, and ultimately they end up doing what's best for the greater good. But once their quest is completed, they realise that their differences are putting a great strain on their relationship, as each of them end up in different factions to each other with different ideas on rule and justice. That is all I know about the first book in the series. again, I've seen absolutely wonderful reviews of it, and I'm just really looking forward to starting a new book series. I also have 2 books in the start of a series. I have The Poppy War and The Dragon Republic by R.F. Kuang. So I read Babel at the start of this year. It was my first 5-star read of the year. I absolutely adored that book. And naturally, I just wanted to pick up everything else that R.F. Kuang has written. So I decided to pick up The Poppy War, and then I had this sort of anxiety because I was like, what if I really end up enjoying The Poppy War and then I immediately want to read the second book? So I picked up the second book. So I have that ready to go when I finish The Poppy War. This follows our main character Rin, who's orphaned from a war that's previously broken out in her country, and despite growing up poor and with some serious setbacks, she still holds hope that she will one day achieve great things. She begins to study in secret and hopes to gain access to be able to go to an elite military school where she can develop her fire powers. So that is all I know about this series so far, but like I said, I absolutely adored Babel, and if it's any sort of similarity in themes and writing style, I know I'm just going to love it. And now I'm on to my final books that I'm going to be chatting to you about. I picked up the first 3 books in the Gentleman Bastard sequence. So I have The Lies of Loch Lamora, Red Seas Under Red Skies, and finally The Republic of Thieves, all by Scott Lynch. This is a series that I have been meaning to read for the last couple of years. I've always had my eye on them, and I was always thinking, okay, I'll get to it one day, and Chapters had a sale on a couple of months ago, and I was able to pick up the first and third book in the series. And then, even though they're not numbered, and even though no one would know, but I knew the fact that I had 1 and 3 on my shelf, and it just bothered me, so I just went and picked up the second book in the series. So I was like, well, at least I could read them back to back if I want to. That used to be like a massive pet peeve of mine, of watching people haul books in a series that they hadn't even started yet, and it's like they're getting multiple volumes, and I'm just like, you are stressing me out. But now I have become the villain in my own story, so that's somewhat depressing. But anyway, back to these books. So this follows our main character, Loch Lamora, who is an orphaned boy. Loch Lamora is able to avoid the harsh life of being an orphan as he's taken under the wing of a gifted con artist, and he becomes a thief. But through his thieving shenanigans and somewhat arrogance, I'm assuming, he defies the unspoken law that is held between the criminal world and the government. It seems like he's a character who's going to be getting himself in hot water and trying to get himself out of it time and time again. But do you know what? It sounds like it's going to be good fun, and I'm really looking forward to it. That has been my big-ish fantasy book haul. Let me know if you've read any of the series and your thoughts on them, or if you yourself are planning to get into any fantasy series over the summer. Let me know what you're thinking of reading, because I'm always interested in getting future recommendations. As always, if you want to follow my bookish shenanigans outside of YouTube, you can follow me on my Instagram or my newly made TikTok. I'm having such a good time making little bookshop tour videos and library content over on my TikTok at the moment. So definitely check that out if you're into short form content. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.